Bree, am I introing us or are you?
We all know children have a natural innocence.
Good morning. Thank you for listening and tuning in today to Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. Sorry, we had a slight audio change there. Not sure what's going on there, but thank you for joining us this amazing and warm Monday. We've got a great show lined up for you. So there's a lot of news and things that have been going on over the past week that we will jump into and talk about. We've got some kind of fallout from the USCCB conference that happened 2 weeks ago now. So without further ado, I'll let Bree introduce herself, and then we'll jump into it and have a lot going on this morning. So we're trying to get into it pretty quickly.
Good morning, Joey. Yes, it's very warm out. And for those of you who are watching us on social media, you may see me come in and out today because my internet is down and out most days anyways. Welcome to Italy. But now it's been playing around. So hopefully that won't be the case. At a binding prayer, you guys pray as well so that we have no issues with our electronics. But I am Bree Dail. I am the internationally accredited journalist, including accreditation to the Holy See as the Rome correspondent for the Epoch Times, and you may find me also on National Catholic Register on occasion. And this show is broken down into three themes. Joey and I like to speak about news impacting faith, and then connecting this news to impacting culture, and finally news that's dealing with current events or politics. And so what I find very interesting is that we have a lot of that happening intersecting this week, right, Joey? We've got the USCCB fallout and then the responses from our lawmakers. And one of those responses is a group of lawmakers calling to abolish the exemption, the tax-free status of the Catholic Church in the United States. But my question is, would that be really a bad thing? Would we see more transparency on the finances? We know that there have been financial corruptions in the past. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. The U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, is here in the Vatican. And we'll talk a little bit about what we know. There's not a lot because journalists weren't invited again. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we heard today that, and there goes my internet, you can see, we heard today that another bishop has resigned, offered his resignation to Pope Francis, this time out of Poland under a Vos Estis violation covering up sex abuse. But here's the thing. There is a bigger investigation underway, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll give you a little bit of an update on what's been going on out of Dijon, France. And back and forth between a bishop and his parishioners out of the Fraternity of St. Peter. And also, a question of mine, Joey, went viral in the last week. A question to Archbishop Paul Gallagher, who is de facto the foreign minister of the Vatican, at a press conference on the day of prayer and remembrance of Lebanon. This question was about the difference between Lebanon, what's going on in Lebanon, and Hong Kong. And he finally made an answer for the Holy See. So a little bit about that. And then Epoch Times may be the last of the printed free press in Hong Kong now that Apple Daily has closed its stores. What does that mean to the future of Hong Kong? And why do we even care? Right? We'll discuss that. And then hopefully towards the end of our show today, Joey, we're going to talk a little bit about a few cultural stories. One, a book published in English by an author and archaeologist on the life of Christ. Michael Hesseman is very well known internationally as one of the foremost experts on the shroud. And then a new display in a Roman gallery had Archbishop Georg Ganswein attend the inaugural of this gallery. Why was he there? He was the secretary, or is the secretary, for Pope Emeritus Benedict. So a lot to talk about today. I hope everybody stays with us and sticks with us through the show. So Joey, let's start off with stories out of the Vatican, and then we'll hit Washington, D.C. How about that?
Sounds like a plan. Let's do it.
Okay. So really quick, a breakdown about Secretary of State Blinken here in the Vatican. So we knew about this in the press that he was coming here. Unlike, the rumors that came out of a certain Catholic media, this was confirmed that Anthony Blinken was on schedule to meet Pope Francis. He did so this morning. I was hearing the helicopters. I'm sure you were hearing that too and getting some flashbacks. But we were not invited to attend really anything with him, which has been an issue with the press corps in the Vatican. Joey, you can imagine, not with all the discussion from Pope Francis on transparency, it's not being given to the press, and instead, the only ones who really get the story is the Vatican-owned press. The Vatican press. And so they do the interviews, they make the statements, and that's all we get. So we received a statement this morning responding to questions from journalists. The director of the Holy See Press Office, Matteo Bruni, he stated that this morning's audience to U.S. Secretary of State Antony John Blinken took place in a cordial atmosphere, rather. It lasted about 40 minutes, and then it was an opportunity for the Pope to recall the trip he made in 2015 and expresses his affection and attention to the people of the United States of America. So that's all we really have, and a photograph of their meeting this morning. Do you think that China was on the docket? Do you think that we heard anything, or we will hear anything of what went on in discussion? Could communion have been on the docket? Joey, what are your thoughts?
First of all, I don't think we'll ever know. I mean, it's a private closed-door meeting, and I think they did that for a reason. So with the U.S.'s reluctance lately or it's not even a reluctance, it's just complete ignoring of China and CCP propaganda and a lot of the issues that they're involved in by the Biden administration, as well as this pontificate. He's largely ignored anything that China has done over, I don't know, probably the last, for sure, the last 5 years. So, I mean, if there's going to be anything of coordination, it's just going to be more of the same. And I don't think that.
But do you think that the kind of closed door atmosphere of this is because Blinken has actually been quite outspoken with reference to China, as was the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo beforehand, to the point where Pope Francis refused to see Mike Pompeo when he was here. And, we believe that was partially because he wrote a pretty scathing article before he came about the Vatican's silence. But that hasn't stopped Anthony Blinken to speaking out as well for state. So I don't know.
He's not really speaking out. I mean, the first meeting between the two that happened back in January was a bit of a disaster for him and the State Department. They let the Chinese just run roughshod over them and say pretty much whatever they wanted to. So I think anything that he has to say now is kind of tainted through that lens. And I don't see the Biden administration taking a hard stance functionally. Like, he can say whatever he wants to, but there's no sanctions. There's going to be no actual action or anything else. So, and I think if I had to guess, what would happen or what was discussed. I mean, I think that probably the USCCB like the conference that happened a week or so ago would probably have come up in conversation. But it seemed like it was more of just the courtesies. Like he went and saw the Sistine Chapel. He posted some pictures online of him taking it, and I can't imagine that this was a very substantive meeting. More of a, hey, we're here. It's nice to see you. Thank you for seeing me. You know, let's work together and on whatever initiatives that we can work together on. Handshake, photo op, and see you later. Jump back on the plane and get out of here. That's probably what happened. I can't imagine there being much more to it.
Yeah, it's just like a introduction as Secretary of State. I think I would concur with you on that. You know, it is interesting, though, because at the same time, he is meeting with Middle Eastern leaders this week as well. So that could have been in conversation. Although what we're hearing is it was just kind of a reformalization of relations. Now, we have to remind ourselves that it was the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who has encouraged the embassies to fly the gay pride flag. And that caused waves a few weeks ago when the ambassador, or really the embassy, because we don't have an ambassador right now, to the Holy See, flew a gay pride flag, and it ended up being a Pache flag instead, the wrong flag. But I do find this quite interesting that we are seeing this engagement so early. Perhaps it was a little bit of a, hey, we still have normalized relations, especially after all of the disinformation that came out about Biden meeting Pope Francis. Now, we are going to talk a little bit about the press conference you mentioned earlier in my question, and later on in the second half of this, the second segment, because it's a little bit long, but I want people to hear my question in its entirety and the answer in entirety, because I think it's really key for people to understand where we're at. But this week, Paul Gallagher, the Archbishop, who is really formally a foreign minister for the Vatican, came out very strongly and initiated real diplomatic relations with the Italian government in protest of a big bill that's being passed right now, or they're looking to pass, which limits or causes, it's an anti-homosexual, anti-phobic bill that is supposed to be in support of gay and transsexual language in schools, i.e. banning the terms mother, father, and whatnot in these education systems. It's very, very, very left-leaning bill, and supported by very, very left-leaning individuals. And the Vatican came out and said this bill is looking to potentially violate the Lateran Treaty, because it could incarcerate Catholic teachers in Catholic schools in Italy because they choose not to abide by this law. What have you seen about this Zan? I think it's called the Zan law. The Zan law.
Yeah, it's named after a member of the Chamber of Deputies that wrote the bill. His last name is Zan. So not to get super into Italian politics, although I find it pretty interesting. European politics is completely different from American politics, for those of you playing along at home. But there's the bill. So there's the Lateran Treaty is what establishes the autonomous state of Vatican City. It's what and they signed it in the 1930s to give the Vatican its own, basically to make it a nation state. And part of that was that the state of Italy, the Republic of Italy, or at the time the Kingdom of Italy, would not interfere in the running of the Catholic Church. So the issue is with this particular bill, and it basically tries to add on to a lot of the existing laws, and it takes puts a spotlight on, if you will, the word phobia, right? So it's really big on the word phobia. Like there's a fear of people. So they try, and what it's, the big thing that it does, the really important piece of this, and it's in Article 7 of the legislation. It says that they will establish a national day against homophobia, lesbophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. And then later on, and when they explain what that means, is that they want to make this day similar to commemorative initiatives against, or in the model of the Day of Remembrance against the persecution of Jews and victims of National Socialism. And they want to do this day, and they want to apply it to schools. So that would mean that for all practical purposes, if it was a Catholic school in the United States, or I'm sorry, in Italy, they would have to then recognize this day and celebrate this day within the Catholic school. So that's where a lot of it, where it kind of boiled over, was this particular thing. So it's an interesting thing to follow, and I'm curious about it. So I know we're coming up on our first break, so we're going to run into that pretty quickly. So when we come back, we're going to dig more into this. We're going to talk about the fallout from the USCCB and their butting heads with Congress, and we will catch you on the other side of this break. So stick around.
Moral relativists think moral absolutes don't exist because cultures differ in their moral beliefs. But is this a rational inference? The answer is no, and here's the reason. You see, it confuses moral epistemology, the accurate knowledge of moral truths, with moral ontology, the existence of moral truths. Differing moral opinions have to do with knowledge of moral truths, or lack thereof, not their existence. Furthermore, if we say absolute moral truths don't exist because cultures disagree on them, well then we're going to have to deny the existence of absolute cosmological truths, because scientists disagree about them. But we don't want to do that because we might end up denying the objective shape of our planet and its relation to the sun. Differing moral beliefs, therefore, doesn't negate moral absolutes. I'm Carlo Broussard with the ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
We all know children have a natural innocence and a sense of wonder. Yet our world is full of distractions that can pull families in the wrong direction. But with the help of God and a church family, your children can grow in the security of faith, hope, and love. Weekly Mass provides that critical faith foundation needed in life. So if your family hasn't been to Mass in a while, we'd like to invite you home. Discover more at CatholicsComeHome.org.
And welcome back to Intersections with Bree and Joey. Hey, Joey, we were discussing in the last segment the Zahn bill, which I find really interesting because it really does connect into what we're going to talk about next, which is the USCCB meeting and the fallout politically coming from our legislation. But let's finish up because I think what you had was really, really interesting before we went to break. So tell us, kind of wrap up what you think is going to be impactful and why you think the Vatican's engagement with the Italians was so prevalent.
Sure. So to kind of put a bow on this, if you will, is that there's a bill in the Italian Parliament, and it's going to go before the Senate. It has already passed the Chamber of Deputies, which is the lower house. There's a lot of elements to this. There's an existing law that they're trying to add a few words to, but there are a few key takeaways that impact Catholic schools specifically. The language that they're allowed to use would have to be more inclusive, as they like to say. And then the other thing is that they would be forced to recognize this national day against all the phobias, right? The slew of them. So that's really what it boils down to, and that a Catholic school would then be forced to celebrate this day like all the other public schools in Italy. So that's what they came out against and said, hey, we need to take another look at this. On the other end of this, the Italian government, the prime minister said, we're a secular state and we're not going to basically bend the knee to the Catholic Church. We're going to allow this to be discussed in the Senate. We're not going to change it, and if they want to legislate on it and they want to make it a law, then there's not really a lot that the Vatican can do or influence. That was the kind of the attitude of the prime minister. So we'll see where this goes. It's kind of interesting to see not necessarily the church aspect of it, but the state of Vatican City utilize some of their treaties to kind of bump heads with the government of Italy. So we're going to continue to see, and I think the theme here is that there is going to be a bumping of heads and some skirmishes over different cultural matters when it comes to governments, secular governments, and Christianity and the Catholic faith. And so that's what I think. So, Bree, can you kind of give us a recap of what's been going on with the USCCB and where we're at now?
Right. So the United States Council of Catholic Bishops, Congress, I always forget what the CC stands for. They have been getting together and discussing in the last few weeks, coming up with a document discussing the Eucharist. And part of that document, reportedly, even though we don't know because they're just beginning to discuss this, is further instruction, as if we really need it. I guess we have to, although canon law already is pretty clear on this, about individuals who are representing in a public way the Catholic Church, whether or not you're an influencer or a politician, who at the same time is supporting anti-Catholic legislation, and the big one being abortion. And, whether or not they are permitted to receive the Eucharist if they persist in this. And those individuals, some of them would be Nancy Pelosi or, having to deal with our president himself, Joe Biden. And he was asked, if you remember at a press conference, what he thought about the fact that this was passed. And he said, well, this is a private matter and I don't think it's going to happen. Meanwhile, something came out, Joey, from a fair few number of public officials in the United States protesting this and almost quasi-blackmailing the USCCB on if they were to come out strongly in this way, what could be the fallout for that. And they also mention the removal of the tax-free status. Now, Joey, I want to make this really clear because I think most people do recall that whenever something like this takes place, that's what they bring up is tax-free status. You are engaging in politics and therefore no longer permitted to have tax-free status. But people tend to forget that at the same time, during, say, like the Biden administration, or sorry, the Obama administration, the USCCB was receiving money, taxpayer money, to push out from the pulpit support of the reintegration of refugees from Syria and other Middle Eastern countries into the United States, if you recall. So it is quite interesting that it's only on these topics that counter legislators that they begin to throw the tax exemption around and weaponize that. Your thoughts, Joey?
So a couple things to kind of back up a little bit. So first of all, it's not the document hasn't been written yet, so we don't know what exactly it's going to say. I think the second thing is that it's not just about politicians, and they've made that pretty clear. I forget the bishop that's the primary author or is going to be the primary author on the document, but we made that very clear that it's not just about politicians, not just about a political party either. They're writing this document for everyone. Should they kind of veer off this path that they feel that the United States should be going on as Catholics. So that's kind of the point of all of it, is that it's not just about that, but because on the particular issue of abortion, they have a big problem with it, right? They don't want this to be their issue, because this is where they can draw when I say they, is the Democratic Party can draw their line in the sand and say, hey, if you do this to us, we're gonna do that to you. It's just gonna become a back and forth. And it's interesting that they don't have problems with any of the other things that they've done, right? So it's really just this issue, and that's why I think behind the scenes, this is probably more theater and like political theater and posturing than it is actual what's going on behind the scenes. Because there's a lot of money that moves around between the U.S. government and the USCCB. So, I'm not expecting them to come out and say, and no one listening to this should either. I don't think they're going to come out and say that if you support abortion, then you're going to be excommunicated. You're not going to be able to receive communion. Because I think the other side of that argument is that, well, then if you support the death penalty, then you shouldn't receive communion either.
No, actually, Joey, and I would say there is arguments to that, but the death penalty has always been supported in the Catholic Church. You can go back and take a look at that and the reasons behind that. St. Thomas Aquinas makes it very clear.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. What I'm saying is that's going to be the other argument that comes out, and they're going to fight over these two particular issues. That's why Republicans and Democrats, and it'll come down to this awkward tit for tat back and forth thing that's going to happen.
Well,
it really shouldn't.
I think, though, if you take a look at someone like Archbishop Cordileone from San Francisco, he has been one of the most outspoken of the bishops in recent days. And what I find very, very interesting is that he has come out now and spoken very strongly against these legislatures, and he's also spoken with reference to the bishops who signed. A few of the bishops, and it really seems to be more like a few rather than the list that was provided, because there have been several bishops who said, I never signed this document, headed by Cardinal Gregory. Wilton Gregory from Washington, D.C., but, in protest of writing this document for Eucharistic, just a teaching document on the Eucharist. But Cordileone has, in his own Archdiocese, Nancy Pelosi. So this is where the rubber meets the road. Is he going to deny her when she returns to San Francisco? And we will see, because right now she's in Washington, D.C., so that would be Gregory. But that's
the real question, right? Is that they're still, no matter what this document says, no matter what it says, they
still have to act.
The loophole will still be that we'll leave it up to the local bishops to decide what to do. So if you're a local bishop and you're in a heavily Democratic state or a heavily Democratic city, you're likely going Chicago, D.C., New York, L.A. We'll see what happens with the local bishops when push comes to shove, what actually happens, right? And I think that there's two things you brought up before, and one was kind of lightly, but one is the tax exempt status. So I think there's some merit to the topic you brought up. Like it would shed some light on stuff, but also. I'm not a huge fan of the government taking money away from what's largely a charitable organization that does work all over the United States and all over the world. Now, we can get into a more nuanced debate or a discussion about where that money actually goes and what it does. But as a principle, I'm not a huge fan of taxing charitable organizations or taxing faith-based or religious-based organizations. That just
I don't like
taxes in general, so I would prefer fewer taxes than more taxes.
Right.
I think the U.S. government today is a terrible steward of taxpayer dollars. But the other thing that's interesting, the fallout of all of this, is the letter that came out that was signed by 60 Democratic House members, calling, I believe they called it the Statement of Principles, is what they called it, and kind of the big one for me is when they called it the living. What's the quote here? I think it's a living tradition. They called the Catholic faith a living tradition, which is similar to what they call the Constitution, which is a living document, which basically means however I decide to interpret it is really whatever I want it to be. So that was like the big thing, is that they called this thing, they called the Catholic faith a living tradition. No, it's...
And whose responsibility is that? Whose responsibility to have catechized those individuals to get them to the point where they think that my truth is the truth?
Yeah, it goes back to this relativism thing, and I love the commercial because we hear it all the time, and I don't know what, maybe it's a sign. So we hear the moral relativism thing, and we've talked about it a lot personally, like outside of the show. We've talked about this living, or your interpretation of whatever we're talking about, right? And relativism is usually used to justify terrible things. In this case, they're using it to justify abortion, and it's interesting that they use this. And then the other phrase that they threw around in there was about the common good, and that's a phrase that we see a lot. They are going to use the common good, the phrase common good, to justify what's going to be a lot of persecution of Christians and Catholics, especially in the United States. We've already started to see it, where an organization was going to lose its tax exempt status, and because the Bible is associated with the Republican Party. what? So, I mean, does that mean that all these Catholic Democrats that just signed this letter that I don't like, none of this makes sense. None of it lines up. None of it aligns. None of it is logical. It doesn't fit into anything. It's like if you take if this was a math equation, it definitely wouldn't balance out. So I think those are the common good and the living tradition part where I'm like, wait a minute here. This is the same argument they used against the Constitution to justify limiting free speech, taking away the Second Amendment. I mean, the next thing you know, they're going to justify, housing soldiers in private homes again, which was, I'm totally in favor of that because, a free house for a soldier would be great. So, but that was a big one, right? Like, there's certain things there that we just can't give up on. We can't stop fighting for them. And they're using the same language now that they used to attack the Constitution, to attack the Catholic faith.
So I want to switch a little bit to some of the other news out, and then we're going to talk towards the end of the segment on what Archbishop Paul Gallagher, again, the foreign minister, told me this week at a press conference. But first, there has been in certain very small circles of the Catholic Church, there are groups who really tend towards tradition. You know that I have been attending traditional Latin Mass for a while, and I brought you and your girlfriend a few times over to traditional Latin Mass. The first traditional Latin Mass I think you attended was Cardinal Burke's High Mass. So you got to jump into the deep end on that, right, Joey?
Yeah, it was a lengthy affair.
So, at that parish is the Fraternity of St. Peter's here in Rome. They also had a church that they were guests of, from what I understand, in Dijon, very long-term guests since 1998, I believe, in Dijon, France. And there has been quite a bit of back and forth between the bishop, who really does have the ultimate power and ultimate say in a diocese, and the community that surrounds the Fraternity of St. Peter's in Dijon. So the back and forth has been the bishop has wanted the priests to concelebrate Mass, and specifically on Holy Thursday. And he claims that when they were invited, they did so for quite some time until the new priest showed up around 2007. And then the Fraternity of St. Peter's have had quite a bit of back and forth internally as well on this. And they went all the way up to Pope Benedict the 16th, when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger and in charge of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. And they said, hey, do we have to? Are we forced to concelebrate? We don't recognize that as part of the Roman rite. And we say the traditional Latin Mass. And it was made clear in something called Protocol 1411-99 from Pope Benedict, then Ratzinger, Cardinal Ratzinger, that they indeed could not prohibit their priests from concelebration, and therefore kind of kept that door open for priests to, or for bishops to kind of engage their priests in their diocese to concelebrate or collaborate in order to be able to show this unity. Okay, so that's the background to this. I am, as a journalist, kind of objective in this. I can see both sides, and it does seem to be an issue between personalities, too. It seems like the superior of the group there was very adamant that he was not going to concelebrate in the Novus Ordo, or the new rite, what most people tend. And because of that, the bishop said, get out. And when he did that, get out, that caused quite a scandal. And there were protests in the diocese this week, Joey, which I think is kind of interesting. So protests, the bishop actually came out for it, and he was videoed, and this video went onto their Facebook page. And the bishop came out and said, well, there's going to be a new document coming out of the Vatican. And so, and it's going to address concelebration. And when he was challenged on whether or not that was true, or if he had seen the document, he wasn't able to say. So it does seem like the bishop had heard rumors, and we discussed about these rumors, that, the document doesn't exist right now. According to the Vatican, the document does not exist, and until it is signed and approved by the Pope, it doesn't exist. So these rumors that have been spreading have caused a bit of scandal. And now it seems to be assessing that this bishop preemptively decided, hearing upon this rumors, that he was going to act against a troublesome group that he considered troublesome in Dijon. So that's the update right now. He came out and he said this on video. And so it seems like he is caught in presumption. And I think the people there are pretty upset. But we'll keep focusing on this because it does seem like it really is kind of the it's kind of the example of what we're seeing in larger divisions that are taking place in the church right now, especially focusing on the traditional Latin Mass community. Now, Joey, the big thing that came out this past week for me is that Epoch Times went viral, and it was because I went to a press conference on Lebanon. So I'm gonna ask our producer to go ahead and play the entire clip of this. I hope you guys will appreciate it.
Good morning. My name is Bree Dail. I'm with Epoch Times. With the financial and political upheaval, and especially the popular unrest against political corruption that we have seen in Lebanon and in the greater region, what makes this situation different to the Holy See and the Secretariat of State, outside, of course, the region itself, to the popular uprisings in Hong Kong, and where Catholic leaders have been incarcerated, and request support has been personally brought by Cardinal Joseph Zen 2 years ago? Thank you.
Well, obviously, Hong Kong is the object of concern for us. Lebanon is a place where we perceive that we can make a positive contribution. We do not perceive that in Hong Kong. One could say a lot of, shall we say, appropriate and words that would be appreciated by the international press and by many countries of the world. But I, and I think many of my colleagues, are yet to be convinced that it would make any difference whatever. And I think that here we have an opportunity. In Hong Kong, we have a very different situation altogether. Thank you.
Except remaining open to the work of the Holy Spirit, as you would do.
Well, we hope the new bishop is going to do a lot of good work as well.
Wow, Joey. So to me, that answer was very much what we have been considering when we think about the silence out of the Vatican on Hong Kong and China. It's just very difficult to actually hear it from, the diplomatic official, the Vatican's foreign minister. I'm grateful, however, for Archbishop Paul Gallagher for being very direct. And being, making the point. But Joey, when you saw that, what did you think?
So the first thing, and I wasn't there, and there's some context I think that, or a follow up that probably would help too. But
they didn't take it. They closed the press conference at that question.
Yeah. So there is a difference politically between Lebanon and that area of the world and the governments that are there than the governments that are in the government of China. So
of course, but that's why I said outside the region, the issues in the region, the political, not
sure.
the popular uprising, right? What is different against that corruption in Hong Kong?
Well, I think the church is
because the Vatican's getting very much involved with that in Lebanon. That's what this whole day of remembrance and prayer for Lebanon. The Vatican that whole press conference was about what the Vatican is doing and how the Vatican is coming to engage with different religious organizations who've asked for their help. Where we know Cardinal Zen has also asked for help.
Yeah, and that's why. So that's kind of the thing that I'm looking at is that they view that they can do something in Lebanon, but because of the political situation in China, they don't think that they can. And in my mind, it feels like they're waiting for a political opportunity to be able to do something instead of leveraging the vast political power and platform that they have to make the opportunity happen.
The
Like,
moral authority of the church,
so
right?
they
which
have,
was used
yeah,
by
instead of waiting for an opportunity, or instead of saying like, hey, the political winds are advantageous to us in Lebanon, and we can probably do some good things there, and in Hong Kong, not so much. Then make it happen. Then make it happen. Support the people there, support the Christians there, support the Catholics there, support your priests and your bishops there, and make it happen. But
the question has been, Joey, from the get-go, and I spoke with Cardinal Zen about this, because it was stated by Cardinal Pietro Parolin when they started to do this secret Sino-Vatican deal, that this deal had been on the works and had been on the desks of several popes, including John Paul II and Benedict. And Cardinal Zen said, yes, there were certain factions of the hierarchy who were pushing this kind of diplomatic legislation, this whole idea of, hey, just give everything to the CCP, let them, in order to stop the continued persecution, because everything else hasn't worked. That was the mentality. And every time it made it to, and Cardinal Zed said this, every time it made it to the desks of the popes, they completely rejected it. So why was that the case, especially with someone like John Paul II? There's a great book out that's called The President, the Pope, and the Prime Minister. I think that's the name of it. And it talks about how John Paul II, President Reagan, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher all worked together behind the scenes in order to really undermine the USSR and really bring it down and really leverage the moral authority of the church to do that. And John Paul II made no bones about it. I mean, he went to Poland multiple times, and there was nothing that could be done. So, Joey?
So here's it's a theme that I see running through the West, okay? So because China represents this massive market of tons of people for the West to sell products to, services to, influence, open up to sports and culture and faith, right? There's this massive kind of just like body of people, okay? So the West, and it's corporations and entities that the Vatican has partnered with recently. It's big banks, it's entertainment companies, it's Disney, it's everyone is giving China a pass for everything. It doesn't matter if it's Disney, JP Morgan, the Catholic Church, the U.S. government, every Western government, aid organizations, the Red Cross, everyone gives China a pass. Everybody does it. Everybody does it because if they don't, then they will cut off access to whatever segment of that population that organization is trying to reach. And the Catholic Church should be trying to reach all of them. And recently there was some analysis that was done that said that President Xi is deathly afraid of Christianity, that there's something like they expect like 300 million Chinese Christians who are largely Catholic to become a huge problem for them in the next 5 years. But so I think there's a lot of this going on behind the scenes. And, we might not, maybe there's a bigger strategy and a bigger thing that's happening behind closed doors within the church that we just don't know about. It's always a possibility. But what I'm saying is publicly to you and I and to everybody else that has two sets of eyes and 2 ears, or a set of eyes and 2 ears, we look at all of these companies. We look at MLB, NBA, NFL, Disney, every movie organization that has existed that wants to shoot movies there, all of this huge market. No one says anything. But as soon as something happens in the West, that's kind of the problem, is that they're this double standard, and it's becoming impossible to miss. So on that note, we've got a few more stories to close out the show with, so we're going to hit our second break. When we come back, we will wrap up our conversation on China and tee off on a couple cultural stories we've got, and that'll wrap it up for the week. So stick around. We will be back in a few minutes.
The Immaculate Conception is a Catholic dogma that many Protestants have a hard time accepting. They claim it shouldn't be believed because it's not found in the Bible. But I beg to differ. Recall how after the fall in Genesis 3:15, God promised to set enmity between the woman and Satan, between the woman's seed, the Messiah, and Satan's seed. This separation from Satan means the woman's not tainted by sin in any way. Moreover, woman seems to be a title for Eve in her pre-fall state, as is the case in Genesis 2:23. She isn't called Eve until after the fall in Genesis 3:20. So who's this new woman? It's the mother of the Messiah, Mary. So just like the first woman was created without original sin, so too the new woman, Mary, was created without original sin. That's to say, immaculately conceived. I'm Carlo Broussard with the ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Years ago, when I started acting, modeling, and singing in Mexico, my Catholic faith was not the center of my life. It took me many years to discover that success, fame, money, and all the pleasures of the world were not going to fulfill me. I got to a point in my life where I thought I had everything, but I realized something was missing. Thankfully, I began a faith journey that brought me back to God and home to the Catholic Church. You can too.
Discover more at CatholicsComeHome.com.
And welcome back to Intersections with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot. We've been having a pretty thorough discussion on a lot of faith news this week. So we started off talking about the USCCB and some of the fallout with politicians in the United States. We touched briefly on some headbutting going on between the Vatican and the Italian government. Next, we've talked about, right before the break, we were talking about Bree's question that she asked to essentially the foreign minister at the Vatican, and the idea that the West just gives China a pass on pretty much everything, and there's really only kind of this march down this path, and especially in Europe, it's kind of interesting because there's two countries that are holding the fort, if you will, against a lot of this. And we've talked about both these countries before. And like I said, if you would have asked me 10 years ago to pick a bingo card for who was going to help save Christianity in the West, they wouldn't have been on it. But Hungary and Poland are the two big countries that are kind of leading the charge on this, to the admonishment of their European neighbors and the EU in general. So keep an eye on those two countries moving forward. Keep an eye on this other story. And just, I mean, it's not news to anybody probably listening to this right now that the West gives China a big pass on pretty much everything. So, that's kind of the problem. But keep an eye on Hungary and Poland. There's a lot of news coming out of Hungary and Poland. I know Bree does a pretty good job trying to keep tabs on a lot of those things. But keep an eye on them. And then I know we had a couple more stories. One that I wanted to talk about first, Bree, and just because I sent a link to it earlier, but a few, I would have been months ago now, there's an artist, and I use that term liberally, no pun intended, called Little Nas X, and he made Satan Nikes, 666 Satan Nikes. And Nike then sued him, so they couldn't make any more, and it was pretty disgusting and vile all around. And then yesterday, there was at the BET Awards, he wore a dress that the designer of the dress, I'm saying he, so obviously he's a man, but he was wearing this huge, elaborate dress that drew comparisons between Nazi Germany and the Catholic Church. And so I was just, from a cultural standpoint, I was like, what is this guy's, I mean, he's got, and his music, he talks a lot about it.
They named it Deus Land. They named it Deus Land, which, they were thinking, it's like douche land, or whatever they want to say. But the thing is that Deus Land means God land. So I kind of
and it's supposed to be a play on Deutschland as well, and Germany. And the designer of the dress said as much. He said that, I was trying to draw a parallel between the Catholic Church and Nazi Germany.
Horrible.
There's a lot of things that happen in culture around the world, and sometimes I'm just like, why?
Why?
All right, okay. I mean, I guess
shock art. Shock value, and it always ends up going against the Catholic Church. And I think it's something really important, Joey, to make mention here for those people who are listening at home. When it comes to Satanists,
and he's an avid and avowed Satanist. I think that's part of his little shtick to cause shock. And there's a lot of them now who've come out directly and said these things, that they're Satanists. But Satanists don't go after just any Christian church. They go after the Catholic Church. And moreover, when the Eucharist is stolen, they don't go looking at, Christian churches, because many Christian churches do like communion services, right? They go after the Catholic Holy Communion, because Satanists recognize the true presence in the Eucharist. The devil does. But so many Catholics, over 80%, doubt or don't believe in the true presence of the Eucharist. I think that's something that really needs to be driven home. The Satanists believe it. And so they're going to go after the Catholic Church whenever, and they're going to justify it because of the sins of certain people in the Catholic Church. But yeah, it was shock art, and it was really quite distasteful. I mean, the whole thing was distasteful. The dress was actually really ugly too. So, I mean, like if there was any kind of taste whatsoever in it, then I would have been like, okay, well, this could have been like some kind of artistic thing. But in reality, it was just all super distasteful. And he didn't.
It was ugly. It was an ugly dress with a terrible message that once again attacks, unsurprisingly, Catholics and Christians. There's going to be more and more of this over the next, especially if you're in the United States, you're going to see more and more of it kind of out in the open.
Yeah, the
it's
war
always
is
going to be
coming.
behind the scenes and kind of hidden and spoken about in hushed words. But if you're in the United States, you're going to see a lot more of this kind of out, open, and in your face. And you're going to have to buckle down and grab your bootstraps and hang on, because it's going to get pretty wild over the next few years. This is my prediction anyway.
Certainly taking the victimhood stance is not going to fly. So just kind of recognizing right then and now that this is going to be painful, and you can choose to endure, or you can choose to capitulate and say, I'm a victim. And I think that that never looks good ever. So
no, and I've been reading and kind of watching a lot of things that are happening lately, especially when it comes to this influx of critical race theory, which we've talked. Funny enough, we talked about this months ago before it really became mainstream, widespread. We had
with
Dr. Jan
Bentz on,
and talking about it. So you guys should have known about this before, the mainstream media and the rest of the general public. But I will say this, that it's great to see at a local level parents and teachers fighting back, and
logically,
all politics is local. So if you don't think that your local election for your school board or your city council, if you don't think those things matter, they really do. And if you don't like who's there, you should put your name in the hat and try to replace them. And especially in some of these local races, it doesn't take a lot. It really doesn't. We're looking at, a couple hundred votes, and some of these races are decided by 10 votes one way or the other. They have a huge impact on your community, on your kids, on the larger family around you, on your faith. There's a lot that happens at the city and state level before you even talk about the federal government. So there's school boards, your court system within there. So like in Nevada, where I'm from, the Supreme Court is an elected body, not an appointed body. There are races, there are things. If you are qualified, or people that are qualified that are just as upset and fed up as you are, push them in the right direction. Put yourself on the ballot. Get them on the ballot. Help figure out how to take back your communities.
Protesting
that's how we're going to fight
work.
back.
Protesting does work, but protesting shouldn't just be, gathering once in a while and yelling at people to do something and then not following through. We need action, but we need critical thinking, calm heads going through and really thinking about these things and acting upon logic and reason in a very emotionally charged, incendiary time. It's one of those things, Joey, that I've said with many, people who have been critics of mine, which I appreciate. But if you think you can do this better, and I hope you do, come and do it. Get involved, be objective, report, because it takes a lot to try to maintain composure and objectivity, and we're all human. But we all have different talents that God made us this for a reason, to have different talents in order to use those talents for the furthering of the kingdom. So, staying online and complaining, that doesn't work. So, start putting yourself in positions where you can make an impact. And I concur with you, Joey, at the local level is really important. One of those things that I find very interesting, kind of transitioning to some of our last stories, is that, Epoch Times, whom I work with, may be the last printed free press in Hong Kong. Apple Daily has closed its stores. And that is something that should concern everyone. Why? Because the free press is what we are calling for in order to be educated and have that critical thinking. It's the free press that is the enemy, the weapons of the people. It shouldn't be weaponized against the people. So that's just another story coming out. And then just kind of, Joey, as a little, I guess free promo, though, I want to show people online who are watching a book. And for those who are listening, a book has just been published by Ignatius Press, Jesus of Nazareth, Archaeologists Retracing the Footsteps of Christ, by my friend Michael Hessman, who is the leading archaeologist and expert on the Shroud. He was here in Rome over the weekend, and just in a quick stop and going to the archives, and highly recommend. I started reading it. It's very interesting when it comes to science to read about Jesus in a scientific way. And then finally, Joey, a gallery has opened up here in Rome, right by where I live in Borgo Pio, highlighting the life of Pope Benedict when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, first when he was Father Ratzinger. Did you know that he was ordained at age 24?
I did not know that.
And he's really young to be ordained. And then later he was ordained with his brother, who was, I think, a few years older. And so there's a really famous picture, that I guess infamous, of him and his brother giving their first blessings with both of their hands outstretched. And it was used, in disinformation, saying that they were giving the Nazi salute. As everybody was conscripted during the Hitler regime into the youth, the Hitler youth, and he and his brother actually escaped from engaging with that and went back home and hid. But that was exploited as well. So very interesting. The gallery is really beautiful and is open right now. I am going to be interviewing the gallery owner this week, and hopefully I'll be able to take you and Anna over to see it. But Joey,
sounds good.
Lots of stories coming out. Coming out this week.
Yeah, well, we talked about a ton of stories today. We got our China stuff in as usual. We've got a lot of Vatican stories in today. We've also talked about the real intersection between politics, whether it's Italian politics and faith, or your U.S. politics and faith. And we kind of gave you some examples of things you can do to fight back, or at least try to lead the charge and take control of your communities and your family and your children. So I hope you enjoyed the show. I certainly enjoyed being here, and I know Bree did as well. So we will catch you next week at the exact same time on Monday. And God bless and have a great rest of your week. Intersection with Bree Dail and Joey Meugniot.